And welcome back. I'm Aaron Steele.
I'm Brian Ricks.
We're going to jump into some demos here. I'm going to run through a bit of a demo on persistent chat, show you how simple and easy it is to deploy.
And then I'll roll over and give a quick demo on installing and configuring, archiving, and monitoring, and then we'll quickly see that there's not much to do. And unfortunately, there won't be any data in the reports to show because we have not turned it on yet, so it's not collecting any data. But we'll leave it to your imagination.
Great. So I'm on a Lync server here in my environment. It's just a front end.
I'm not seeing it. Duplicate.
And technical difficulties arise. Yay! Well, we didn't want a day with everything working perfectly. That would be just bad. So we need something not to work. So
One second, sorry.
Almost there.
nearly.
I see.
Nearly. Yay, okay. Here we go.
Okay, everybody, you should be able to now see my screen. And I'm going to pop into a very familiar tool here, the Lync Server Topology Builder. Look, we've got two central sites, on-prem and Roam. And we could technically, in both of them, have persistent chat pools. In this site, you'll see I don't have a persistent chat pool. I'm simply going to define a new persistent chat pool.
And like a front end, it's either a single or a multi.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And in this case, I just have this server here over here joined to the domain called LSPC01.
Lync server persistent chat 01. Nice.
And I put in the internal FQDN of that server. It doesn't have to be something published to the internet or anything like that. But whatever its actual FQDN is in that AD, I simply hit next, right? Display name of the persistent chat pool. We'll call it Lync persistent chat. And here's an important one. If you're deploying this on a shared server or if you're deploying this for your small lab environment and you want to put it on the standard edition front end, just make sure that port doesn't conflict with another port of a listening service.
All right, because it has to be unique.
We've got here this checkbox. This is really the only checkbox if it's going to be compliance, right? If you're going to turn on compliance for persistent chat, you have to turn it on here in this checkbox. Use this pool as the default for on-prem because I started in on-prem. That's defaulted and checked, and I can't really modify it. On a second persistent chat pool, I would have the ability to update which is the default pool. The important thing to remember here, though, is no matter which server hosts a specific room, the default doesn't matter. You can access, as long as you're on the same environment, you should be able to access those persistent chat rooms.
All right, so the default's just where you go to query what are my rooms, and he's the one dealing with that query.
He's the one running that lookup service.
Right.
Okay. And then we've got this checkbox, use this pool as default for all sites. Because I've got a second site here, I can decide to use this pool that I'm creating right now as the default for all my environments. SQL store. I have this SQL store here. In fact, I'm going to just make sure of which SQL server I should be using. That's the wrong document. It's okay. In this case, I'm going to use a different named instance on that SQL server. And it's called pchat. It's not mirrored.
But it could be, just like we do the other databases.
Yep. And then I'm going to hit next. Use a previously defined store. I can use the store on my server, just the same. That store is where data that is being shared is put into that so that it can be referenced later. And now I simply define what's my next hop for that environment. Next hop is just where it's going to communicate. Again, it's that lookup service. It's the way you find those things. It's not the only place it can connect. And then I hit finish. I've got a persistent chat pool in my topology. I simply hit topology and publish. It's going to verify my deployment, make sure I can get to all those servers. I've got this server. I want to automatically determine my database paths. I hit next.
And now we create the databases.
Yep, it reaches out into that server and reaches out to that SQL server. It publishes the XML into my central management database, and then also goes and creates those databases on the database server.
So if I didn't have a persistent chat defined, but I'd enabled persistent chat by policy, what's the end user experience?
You can't. You can't run the commands to enable persistent chat by policy until you've defined a persistent chat pool. If we look down in my management shell, until I've actually run those steps, right? And you'll see I've got a to-do. They give me a little to-do, and it says, hey, you need to run local setup on all of these servers.
Right, because obviously they're new and they need to get the bits installed on them.
Exactly, but there's no additional configuration that I've got to do. So now I pop over here to LSPC01, and I'm simply going to run the Lync install UI.
Setup.
In this case, because this is a Lync server, it's running all the Lync roles. It's going to get the copy. It's going to get a copy of the XDS. It's going to get a copy of the central management store. You'll notice it'll detect that my Active Directory is prepared. I'll simply use this checkbox here to install or update a Lync system, just like I would any other front end.
And so the deployment process is no different than anything in Lync anymore.
Yep.
It's not outside the deployment realms like it was previously.
Right. It's no longer a separate tool set. It's no longer a separate UI to do any of this work.
So no longer a red-headed stepchild. Nice. Not that there's anything wrong with red-headed stepchildren, don't get me wrong.
Right. Not to offend all the red-headed
Exactly.
stepchildren out there.
Just to clarify.
Emails are coming.
They know how it is.
So in this case, we've simply selected that option 2 to install or update this Lync server. If we'd already run some role on here and we were trying to co-locate something, we wouldn't have to run this step of installing the local configuration store on this server. This installing the local configuration store is what creates that local SQL Express instance, copies over a read-only copy of that central management database, uses that central management database then to decide what changes it's going to make for itself.
All right, so once we have a local copy of our CMS, when we go to query what is changed or installed, we're talking to our own database. We're never talking to the central store other than getting the push
Exactly,
receive.
making sure we have a copy of it, an up-to-date copy of it. And you'll see it's just running this OCS core feature local management store, basically creating a new SQL Express instance on this server and getting that copy of the XDS. Sorry, I switched between XDS and central
CMS.
management because the actual SQL database is called XDS.
Right. And we'll also point out that, I believe, a lot of the components are pre-staged. So when you run this, it's going to take a little longer because it actually has to install SQL. SQL's already been pre-installed from a bits perspective, just not configured or changed.
Yep.
So that was for lab purposes to speed things up. So don't be concerned if when you run this, all of a sudden you're sitting in
SQL's
this window for a
installing
very long
and-
time. All right?
yeah.
It does take a while. So.
Yep. So at this point, I've gotten the database and I've made my changes. At this point, I can run set up or remove Lync server components. And again, I'm not deciding to
What
make
you are.
what changes I'm making at this point. I'm simply reading out that central management database and making the changes that it told me to make. Which, if you're familiar with Lync 2010 or OCS group chat, it's a very, very different experience. See, again here, we have this thing, MCG server, feature chat server, successfully installed, enabling those new roles, making firewall changes.
And done.
I'm done, sort of. I need to get certificates now.
Yeah. This is one of the roles that requires it. And you'll know because if there's a green checkbox already there, you're done.
Yep.
If there's not a checkbox, you need to do something. But this is just an MTLS certificate. So.
Yep. Yeah. It's a certificate that I'm going to get from the internal side. It's going to be very simple.
Now, obviously, if you don't have an internal CA, it's not as simple. You've got to request it, send it out.
Buy it.
Yeah, pay money. Obviously, the easier Deployment, especially obviously in a lab, would be to have an internal CA for yourself. So, but it works either way. If you have public, as long as it's a trusted route by the clients and the servers, you're good to go.
This is standard certificate walkthrough in a Lync on a Lync server. I don't want to put this in Uzbekistan though. Sorry.
It is also interesting to know if you're doing an external cert, these fields are required. If you're doing an internal cert, they're not required, but best practice. But the tool knows because you select at the beginning, is this an internal or an external request?
Yep. So you'll see I've simply got a single subject here. I don't need any SAN attributes. I don't need any of those things.
Right, because like a standard edition, it's the pool is his server is everything. So.
Yep. It just gives me an ability to request that. It then walks through. It's going to go. Sorry, the vagaries of labs. It couldn't publish my cert here because I couldn't get to the certificate service on this domain controller, which I now have to do. Which isn't working. There it is. Sorry about this, everybody.
Oh, same problem as yesterday. We were having networking issues yesterday. Perhaps we have them again today.
It's nice, though. It does give me the ability to simply hit back, and I can
do it
retry
again.
this
Mm-hmm.
because I'm on the certificate step. Hey. That works. The vagaries of the VM environment means I have to stop and restart my certificate services for this to work.
Yeah, and it's a known weird issue. It just is what it is. When things come out of a save state for whatever reason, they don't work. And nearly.
It's actually better
We're
this
done.
time.
Yay.
Because it requested that cert, it got that cert. I now will hit next, check the box for assign. It's going to pop up another wizard and walk me through assigning that certificate.
And why does it not just auto do it? Why does it bring up a second wizard to assign?
Wouldn't that be nice?
I know. Isn't it bizarre? It's like, yes, start the wizard to redo what, just do it. But anyway.
So I've now assigned the cert. It just shows me what the thumbprint was, where it was issued, who it's issued to. Persistent chat.
And as long as we have a green check here, we're good to move forward to start our services.
Yep.
And it's also interesting when you click this, there is it's throwing PowerShell, and the PowerShell command is start dash Windows service, but it's using the dash no wait.
Yep.
No wait means just kick start on everything, and then
Tell
if
me,
they come up, let us
don't
know.
wait for me to know if it started. That's why we give you the optional status tool here for start the services. Check the services are started here.
Right, and that's all that is bring up the services MMC. But anyway,
I've
persistent chat.
now got persistent chat installed.
Woohoo!
I've got a couple of notes here for things that I need to now do. I need to do these things, in fact, because I'm in a coexistence environment in some cases. In some cases, I wouldn't need to do this. If this was a pure Lync 2013 greenfield, I wouldn't need to create these additional endpoints.
Right, and these are the endpoints because that's how the old client talked, so it doesn't know anything better.
Yep.
And so in order to support them, we've got to do the coexistence stuff.
Yeah, in the older clients, the Lync 2010 and 2007 group chat clients would in fact make a SIP request to a specific user and a hard-coded user, OCS chat or group chat, and that user would then find all the rooms and deliver the information in that SIP packet.
Right, and so from a coexistence, not only do we need this if we are going to have group chat still in the environment, but also if we want to use the older clients.
Yes. If you want to use the 2010 client, you need to create these records so that the 2010 client can find without having to use GPO to configure it to find something. And these are the recommended. If you choose not to use OCS chat or group chat as your SIP URI, you will have to implement something like GPO to configure the client.
Right.
And again, I'm creating 2 of these just to make sure, in fact, my R2 client as well as my 2010 group chat client could technically work.
That's very nice of you.
It's not, Coexistence isn't really supported, but.
You know.
And then this last commandlet here, this is the one that won't work if I don't have a persistent chat pool deployed. If I, in fact, don't have persistent chat pool deployed, -enable won't finish out.
If you don't type it right, it doesn't finish out either.
No.
Oh, can we make the screen a little bigger, the text?
Sure, give me just a second here. Wait, you know why I don't have that role, Brian?
Which role would that be?
I'm,
You're not a member of the group?
yeah. So there's a little thing here, which is, there's an RTC.
Persistent.
Sorry, guys. Just trying to find this role.
CS.
Yes. And I'm not in it.
And now you are.
Mm-hmm.
But you didn't log out and log back in to get the
I
groups.
didn't. Sorry about that, guys.
Well, this is good. That way, you know, we get to look at, in fact, what's in the room.
Okay, give me just a second here.
Let me pull latest data. For group chat server, is it really necessary for an additional SQL server? And the answer there would be yes. Again, the I/O requirements and the impact is extremely different than that of our actual world of Lync. And a lot of the I/O from Lync has been removed and pushed to the front-end server boxes. So that's great from a less impact on SQL Server, but that did not change and is no different for persistent chat. And so because of that, we had to make these changes. And so yes, you need a separate SQL store for persistent chat to work correctly. If you're in a lab environment, if you're just trying to test this out, okay, that's one thing. When you go live in production and you have hundreds, if not thousands of users in these rooms, you're definitely going to want something new. Let's see what else. We have is it best practice to have separate monitoring SQL Server stores for each Lync site, or is it better to point to the same store?
Well, having different ones definitely adds a challenge.
Different data at that point.
Yeah,
right?
it makes it a little harder to correlate your data. But for some of the very largest environments, you in fact have to deploy multiples because the monitoring store only supports about 250,000 users.
Right, which you stop and think, well, that's going to support, and it is. It does support a lot of single server, and it's also important to know that the server roles themselves are not an HA role. So the databases can be configured in a mirroring for high availability, but if the actual server itself were to go away, well, then your front-end servers have gone away, and if they're not available, then everything dies and it all makes sense and nothing's going to work. So they are, so I guess I shouldn't say they're not HA. They are inherently HA because what they're hosted on is HA, but they themselves are not HA. How's that? So a big change from what we had in 2010, where you actually had to have standby cold servers if you wanted to have a sort of quote-unquote HA monitoring archiving rolled box, because only one could be active at any one time. Now that it's a front-end service, that's kind of eliminates and alleviates the problems, much like our XMPP did yesterday. So I would say typically in most deployments we do, it's a single pool that's managing
server.
it, so that we can get all the data and all of it's in a single report. Latency isn't an issue. The data gets there when it gets there. It may be another 30 seconds till the end of the call, till it actually ends up in the database. Again, it's never perceived as an issue. And unless you have a numbering of concurrent user problem, so you're over 200, 250,000 users, it's not going to be an issue. That's how it's going to work. And
let's see if my commandlets work now.
all right, and let's get a larger text on the screen so we can see what's going on.
Will do.
Mark this as live. All right. And I guess not.
No, it's me being stupid.
Oh yeah, configuration is a global policy, wouldn't specify it as such.
It's
But the chat
it's a
policy
policy,
is a-
not a configuration.
Right. And it works. Yay.
When you write the right thing, it works.
That's the lovely part of all of this.
So at this point, I've got, and I can fire up and log in to my control panel. Because that's the important thing here. I've just done the work to deploy it, right? I haven't done any of the work to make any of my users be able to use it. If I fire up my Lync client here, you'll see that Bob still doesn't, or John still doesn't have any persistent chat tab.
Aw. Poor Bob. Or John.
Whoever. None of them have anything.
Yeah. And this question that came in about this headquarters SQL backend and a subsite and SQL and backend and how you've created things. If you configure monitoring individually on each pool, to answer your question, monitoring is dedicated to that pool. So you select on each pool which monitoring service you're going to be running, so you would have separate data in that instance. It wouldn't be commingled. We don't have any sort of collation method that data comes up and from all of the monitoring servers into a SQL store of where we're going to. So again, from a design perspective, typically we're using a single solution of whichever pool has decided to do the monitoring, and that particular pool handles it for the enterprise. So.
Sorry, I'm just making life a little easier for myself. And making it so I don't have to enter credentials when I log into my control panel.
Another question came up regarding, can you show us the monitoring screen? There isn't really a screen for monitoring.
It's the monitoring data in the
reports.
monitoring reports.
Yeah, so we'll install it hopefully here in the next demo.
You should be able to see the snapshot of it, or
there just won't be any data.
homepage. You'll see the report homepage.
Right, there just won't be any real data in it because monitoring hasn't been on for this environment, and it's not a real environment to produce data. So, but there isn't a separate application, there isn't a separate anything, it's just the SSRS reports that are presenting our monitoring information.
Yep. Now that I've done all that work, you'll see I have a persistent chat configuration here. I have a tab where I can add those categories and add-ins and policies and configurations. These are all those things we were talking about. So default chat history is 30 days, maximum file size that gets uploaded. What's the update limit to how many participants you will actually notify when you do this? Do you have a unique room management URL? This is if you're implementing a separate room management API.
Right, versus the integrated that's already here with
You don't
us.
have to define anything to get this to work for out of the box.
And remember that the max file transfer size, it applies as long as you're a previous client version. The 2013 client, it doesn't apply.
And it requires you to have, in fact, turned on file upload for that category.
Right. Which gives it the option for those rooms associated to that category.
Yep.
Yeah. So categories can be viewed as the ability to set the top level ethical boundaries of what you want people to be able to see and not see, because we can set who can see and discover anything and then who can manage. So you may want a particular admin to be able to manage some rooms and not others.
Right.
Or maybe it's the actual admin assistant that's managing it and not IT. And so in that case, we need to have a separate category altogether, because otherwise all rooms would be able to be managed by .it.
Right, and from a scoping perspective, at the category layer is really the place you need to do this. You don't want to try and do this at the per room layer.
Right.
You want to do, if you're trying to do an active deny to disallow somebody from viewing membership or from viewing a room or a set of rooms, you want to do that in the deny members. I did see a question before about can we query OUs or groups or things?
And nesting and things of that nature.
Right. It has been definitely a challenge, and the way you need to manage this on large scales is through PowerShell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does all work, and you can specify if you wanted that the participant level, and maybe in an auditorium that would be appropriate, is the top level, your domain of your OU structure. Just anybody that's anywhere can be a member of this particular structure. You can also, as typically best practice, just like file shares, we want to add groups to this and not directly associate users. That allows you to manage it at the Active Directory level and not at the group chat level. But again, it depends on what what you're looking to do.
And you'll see when I hit find for the allowed things, it pulls up containers. It doesn't just pull up users and SIP addresses. It pulls up containers. It pulls up a lot of things for me.
Right. Yeah, much different from an aspect because the security model goes down into AD, unlike a lot of stuff that we're doing in the other sides of Lync.
Yep. In my case, I'm simply going to add my people.
Your peeps.
And it is a little unique here that we call these containers. You probably would call them OUs.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little strange. And we've got some of these persons, containers. I'm simply going to grab Holly and John and Ray and Nuno and Bob and hit OK.
Wow, so those are the people that can be a member of a room that hasn't even yet been defined yet because they're part of this category.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then I will give Bob, I'm going to let create rooms because I trust Bob. He's one of my
He's a nice guy.
He's one of my senior guys.
Besides, Bob spelled backwards and forward is still Bob, so you know it's the right guy. Bob's Bob, right? So unique, nice.
Here's Bob.
Hey, look, Bob's got a persistent chat button now.
Bob doesn't have any rooms.
Aw, poor Bob.
Oh, we want Bob to make a new room. Uh-oh. We may be having problems. In a brand new deployment, it's actually pretty common to see that as things propagate and get filtered through the environment. Let me go look back here.
Yeah, and a lot of this, unfortunately, from a lab perspective, is we're waiting for replication things and timing. And so while the user policy is flipped and said, yes, you've got it, persistent chat, does the environment realize it's got persistent chat, right?
Right.
So
here I'm just checking my replication, and you'll see I've got a service that's stopped here.
darn services.
That's better. Create a chat room. It's going to pop up a UI or pop up a web interface for me here in a second on my lab, and let me actually create that create that chat room.
Okay, question came up. Can the databases, the monitoring, the archiving, the persistent chat, the RTC databases, can all of them be deployed in a default instance?
There are definitely, though, there are support boundaries that dictate what the co-locations are. I'm sure somebody in the chat, one of our helpers, can find you the TechNet link that shows the supported co-locations for a database. There we go.
Speedy. I like fast VMs.
And in this case, it's going to pop up, and I'm actually going to want to log in as Bob. I'm logged onto the workstation as somebody else, so when this pops up, I want to log in as Bob.
Again, great name, great name. While we're waiting for that, there is a question that came up.
Sure.
A little off topic, but is there a PowerShell command in Lync 2010 or 13 to find the number of scheduled meetings and attendee lists for specific dates and times?
No, not really. If you're looking for that type of data, you're going to have to go to the SQL server
And do a
and look it
query.
up. And now you're entering what's supported and not, because that data isn't captured anywhere but on the front-end databases.
Right. And accessing and managing and manipulating those SQL Server databases is not supported.
Yep.
So yeah.
No,
unfortunately.
there's not really an easy way to list out what all conferences somebody has scheduled for themselves. So you see here in I'm on redpool/persistent-chat/RM, and it's just giving some descriptions. And I, as Bob Kelly, have the ability to create a new room.
Now, if I was to try to log in as Holly, I wouldn't have the option to create a room.
Correct.
But I would see rooms I'm a member of and managing? Right.
Yep. And in this case, it's a little funny. I've got a room name here, but I've got a person checkbox. It's a little unique. I'm trying to create a unique name for this room, and it has to be globally unique across my persistent chat and Lync pool deployment.
Because we're making a SIP named object.
Effectively, yep.
We can't be something that conflicts.
Yep. But I don't have to know any of the domain information about that SIP object. I can simply say Bob's room.
And then see if it's available. Yay!
The name is valid. Yay!
We can
Tell
use Bob's
people what the room is for. For talking about Bob.
Positively, of course.
But only if you like me. In my case,
Well, that should be an open room. Let's let everybody talk about Bob.
so and you'll see the UI here.
What about Bob?
The UI here is it is actually quite helpful to us. As soon as I took this from a closed room into an open room, I can no longer specify members. Everybody in my organization is a member of this room by default if it's an open room. Managers of the rooms is, again, back to our slides, who can manage, who can interact with this room, who can disable it. But again, a manager can't delete.
Right.
And if we do a secret room, only members can find and post. If it's closed, other people will be able to see that my room exists, but
And
won't be able to
request
get
access.
into it.
Right. So when it's secret, when you search within Lync to find the room, it will never show up.
If you aren't
have
a
to be
member, you
invited
don't
to
see
it,
it.
you're not going to get it.
Yep.
All right.
In our case, we're simply going to leave Bob's room as open. Don't worry about any of these. So inherit invitation settings from the category. That is when we were back on the Lync server management shell, when we defined this category. If we had made everybody in your organization a member of that category, the room will inherit the membership from that category. Simply going to create the room, and it tells me right up here, Bob's created a room. There's a room, and it actually does have some different icons here about those rooms depending on what room Bob created. When everything filters out, we'll see that I'm a member. We'll follow a room. Find chat room.
Yeah, let's just try searching for Bob, see if it comes up. One thing you'll notice is, there it is, there's the name and then there's chat rooms. There's actually two different things. You could switch back to name, and then that would be searching Lync. If we're going chat room, we're searching Lync's chat room. So there's a different search mechanism.
And when you're on the chat rooms tab and you search,
By
it will
default.
search for for rooms.
Yeah, by default.
So here's Bob's room, and we can simply open Bob's room to see who's in the room.
Oh, only Bob.
This header up here shows who all's in the room at that time.
Right.
Right? And I can talk about Bob.
Hi, Bob.
We love Bob. I now have this ability I can do stuff about this room, right? So I can see a card for this room, and it pops up that UI and shows me the ability to edit that room and show the categories. And again, here's the manager's ability to disable the room.
So the question came, if you have an open room and you set it to send invites to members of the open room, does that mean that everybody's going to get an invite to this room in the organization?
You can't. When you're on an open room, there is no, the invites tab or the invites is dead. As soon as you've made it be an open room, you don't actually send any invites. The UI simply disables both the members and the invitation section of that room.
On purpose. 'Cause you can imagine, you have a 300 user organization, you make an open room and 300 invites just went out?
Yeah, let's not
We
do
don't
that.
want to do that.
One of the really powerful things about this is the ability for me to have unique notification settings per chat room that I'm following or that I'm a member of. So in fact, I can take these simply ones that are coming from my organization, or I can customize them such that I can have unique alerts per room, per thing I'm a member of, to watch for important things in that room. This is where it comes into the real power of this. You can have a room for your financial, traders that have that when they're a member of, they have these 6 rooms. When they're a member of the first room, it plays a bing. If they're a member of the second room, it plays a bong. If they're in the third room, it plays a beep. And they can get really intuitive and very fast access to this information that's coming through these different chat rooms and have intuitive ways to know which room is being interacted in.
And the question that came up regarding the unique names when you were creating the
Yes.
checkbox. Is this per persistent chat pool, per category, or per organization?
It's per organization.
That's right. Because again, this is a SIP address that's being made. Just like you couldn't make 2 Bob Kellys at Contoso.com, we need a unique SIP ID. So
Yep. Even though it doesn't show me here that it's unique or that it is a SIP address, it is a SIP address in the background, and it is unique across Lync.
All right.
Effectively across this deployment, as we call it.
All right.
What else?
That's, I think, an amazing and awesome thing. I mean,
Yeah.
again, the abilities and the things that exist. We have the ego channel if we want to talk about that real quick.
Yeah, sure.
Short of that,
So the ego channel, if we look back at Bob's rooms, there's an ego notification where if somebody types about Bob, Bob will in fact get a, where's my ego notification?
should be in your member of. Replication, you gotta love it. That wasn't a great thing to talk about.
Oh, it's because I haven't followed the room.
Oh, you're not a member of anything yet.
No, it's because I haven't followed the room.
Or follow, member, yeah. So it's in your list.
Yes.
And then ego should just pop up in member of.
Yeah,
There
there's
it
my
is.
ego feed. So the ego feed is in fact an ability for me to get a special notification when somebody types my name
Or some keyword.
or some keyword. It starts with my name,
Right.
moves on to keyword, change the notifications, get distinct things about that notification across all rooms that you are following.
Right. So one key factor, you have to be following the room in order for you to be watching it.
Yep.
It does, I mean, to some
It's got
extent, you're adding loads
resources.
and things,
Yep.
you're putting onto things because you're watching servers and nodes. And so somebody says, I think Bob is great. Boom, you're going to get notified someone's talking about Bob.
And you'll see here, I changed one little thing about my ego feed, which is I made it so that even if I say my own name, I get a notification.
Yeah, because you want to know when you're talking about yourself.
And now I have an ego feed here. It shows who said what word in what room.
Now, was that forwards or backwards? Because there's no capital. Did you spell Bob backwards or did you spell Bob forwards?
Backwards.
Awesome. See, you don't know. That's why Bob's name's so awesome.
Better
Okay.
than Brian? No.
No. But Bob is a cool name. I like the way Bob.
So that's our ego feed.
All right.
And again,
And a unique thing to persistent chat, obviously we're not watching anything else across IMs and things because there's no such thing.
yep.
Yeah.
So think about persistent chat less from the technology. That's the real takeaway from this lab is it's not about the technology behind persistent chat. It's about where can we fit this into the business? Where can we make a business impact by deploying this and getting our users configured for it?
That's right. And don't force it into the business. There's been a lot of times where I've been deploying things, and whether they're my own clients or doing something for whomever, and I can sit there and think, how could I get persistent chat into this? And inevitably I'm thinking, you know what, that's not my call.
Yeah.
It's really, there's got to be a business needing driver, and then persistent chat fits that. Don't try to make persistent chat fix something.
No,
on your
agreed,
own, right?
agreed. But do you have in your organization? Do you have do you need a chat room for your help desk technicians, such that they have a common place they can all go, ask questions, review history, see things from the past of problems they're solving? Do you have critical situations where you need to pop up a room and have everybody who's troubleshooting that situation be in that same room together and not have to fill everybody in when they come in?
Yeah.
How many times have you been on a conference call? You start up a conference call because of a crit sit, 40 people join in, and then 3 hours later, 20 more people join in, and you have to fill them in.
Yeah.
You have to spend 15 minutes filling them in.
One area that we find that may be applicable, again, it's a may, it depends on the organization, but this can be a resource to replace or replace
Augment
public
and
folders.
replace, yeah.
Where public folders have been used to store data and conversations, now this is internal only, so if this is external communications as well, that's not going to work. But if it's internal only communications of a public folder, this could very well be a good replacement or augmentation to that solution.
Most definitely. With that, I think we're going to switch over to Brian, and he'll show you a bit about monitoring and archiving.
That's right. Okay, so moving on to monitoring and archiving in this demo, it was, again, something that we wanted to stress was super simple and easy to deploy. And so in this environment, while it may look like the exact same environment we were just in, it is actually a duplicate without PChat configured. Not that it really matters, but just FYI. So this isn't exactly the same, so if you see things different, that's why. So in my on-prem, I'm going to expand and look at my pool. And again, I have a single enterprise pool. And on this pool, we can see we have no SQL Server or monitoring server configured. Well, we want to go ahead and change that. So we're going to edit its properties. And when we go down to our associations within this properties, there we go, we will say, let's go ahead and enable SQL Server Store. Not that one, that one. But it's going to be asking us, what archiving store do we want to save this to? Now this comes back to the question, where can we keep these? And SQL 1, as you can see above, is the SQL Store RTC for the backend that we have today. It is the exact same thing, and it is an option. 3 happens to be the SQL backend of our Rome branch. Again, probably don't want the SQL Server remotely receiving the data from the pool in Fredman. You could, it is supported, but probably not desired from a location and data compliance and whatnot. So again, whether we have our own instance, our own SQL Server, or we're reusing one, that's up to your current load and how things are going. We'll also notice that mirroring is an option for archiving, and if it is, that would have to be a completely different SQL store that wasn't being used by anything else within the organization, which we don't have defined today. Check that. From a monitoring, CDR and QoE, we have the exact same options. We can select what we want that we want it enabled on this pool, and that we want it to be for SQL 01 once again. And again, we have our option for mirroring. And when I hit OK, we can see that we have the archiving and the monitoring associated to this particular pool, and it's done. Everything looks like it's going to be perfect, so we're going to go ahead, right-click, and publish this topology out. And when we do so, as it verifies, it will go ahead and create those databases, as we would expect, on RTC's SQL 01. If we look at SQL 01, and we look at his, if this wants to come up, well, we'll wait for that later. They won't be there, obviously. We'll have our other databases, and it'll be creating those databases remotely for us. A lot, if not most, SQL administration never happens within SQL. All of that happens within the control panel. Even setting up mirroring, which we'll get into in the HA and the DR stuff. It's all configured and managed through the control panel and PowerShell. It's generally not needed to go to the SQL Server to do any sort of anything. So here we're making our databases. Off they go. The LCS CDR is your CDR. We have the archiving database, where we're going to have archiving. Come on. So the LCS CDR is getting built from scratch, doesn't exist. The LCS log, where we have the archiving going to, and the QoE metrics, where we're storing QoE data. Let's see if this guy ever decided, oh, he decided to play. So now we'll go ahead and pull this up and show the databases that are on this server. So from a can you do it perspective, yes. Should you do it? Depends. And the depends will be on what's happening on the environment, the sizing of the server, the number of users in the environment. It may be very well applicable and it very well may not. From our next steps on what's to do, you'll notice that on FEO1 and FEO2, in order for things to happen, we have to restart the Lync server services. Otherwise, they don't realize that they're going to start being and pushing the information over. If we don't restart those services, or until we restart those services, nothing's going to happen. Now, we're actually not going to do that, but we could do that if we wanted to take everything down at the moment. We don't want to take things down. Going back to SQL 01, we'll go to our RTC instance, and on this instance, we'll see the databases that have been created. As we expand the database list, here we have our QoE metrics, our logs, and the CDR. Again, that's archiving is the LCS log, CDR is CDR database, and the metric database is the QoE metrics. The next thing we're going to do in nearly every deployment is publish out our SQL Server Reporting Service reports. To do so, we do that through the deployment wizard. And you'll notice as I come to the control panel, let me go ahead and refresh him. Come back. Or think about refreshing him as things are querying. There we go. Back to home. If I view my monitoring reports, servers, what's doing my reporting, nothing's listed in that list currently. We're going to go ahead and we've launched our deployment wizard, and we're going to say deploy our monitoring reports. Now, when we're deploying these reports, this is going to talk to the SQL server that has SSRS deployed on it. I am making the assumption SSRS is deployed on SQL 01. That may not be a good assumption. We'll find out real quick here.
I believe it is.
And so if it's not, we can change that. If it's a completely different server or a different instance that is homing the SSRS reports, we can go ahead and make that change here. So if it was in the default instance, maybe we won't have a named instance, or a completely different SQL server. If it's an enterprise deployment of SSRS, that's what we would be deploying here. So here we're going to go ahead and put in our on-prem, who has rights to deploy these. And it also is important to note that whoever's rights we put in here is what we tag in the SSRS to do the run as on behalf. So it's not uncommon that we'll want this to be some sort of service account that's going to be deploying these, because the reports will be running as these reports. We can change this through configuration in SSRS at a later time if required, but if not, this is where we would be doing this at. And then we go ahead and type our password, which I have to look up each time. And it is, assuming I typed that correctly, we'll go here. Now, who can look at the reports? So there are groups that exist that we make automatically. This may not be what you want. You might want domain users, I guess, if everybody in the environment could potentially look at this. Probably not something that we're going to want to do. So typically, we do the RTC Universal Read-Only Admins, and then you know that if a user is a member of that group or a nested member of this group, they will have the ability to launch and read the reports that are in SSRS. And they are read-only reports, so it's not like we can manage or monitor or manipulate that data. And they're not actually talking directly to the SQL server's repositories. Everything's on the behalf of that service account. So when they query, if they have rights, they'll query the reports. The report server will go back and pull the data and then display that information for us. So here it's going to try to talk to SQL 01 on-prem RTC, assuming again SSRS is there, off it'll go. If it's not there, this won't be able to publish. And if we're looking here, we can see actually that, I guess I should have just glanced and taken the time to actually look when I was looking. And you can see report server RTC does exist in this instance of the SQL server. So it is there. Is it configured? Maybe not, but it has been deployed. Okay, so we've connected, which means that yay, that's good to go. Because I used the administrator and that's who installed SQL, he was already existing credentials on the SQL server, so we didn't have to add him. If this was a brand new service account, it would have added that service account to SQL and made those changes for you. And then we went ahead and added the administrator to the report read-only and the LCS CDR reports read-only. Again, all nothing that you configure per se, but this is what's happening in the background. When we start to deploy the reports, it's a method that's happening. We're sending the data over, we're loading up the reports, and we're publishing those reports to the database. So far, as things run by ever so quickly, you can see the various reports that are being published up, including the dashboard itself, some summary reports, metric reports, what devices are registered on your environment. All of this will be available to us in SQL Server Reporting Server once this completes. And we'll be able to see the reports in the dashboard that exists, hopefully. I have high confidence in this lab. It should work. And SSRS isn't something new. It's not something that Lync owns. It's obviously part of the SQL backend and the reports. It's just something that we are leveraging as a technology since SQL's in the environment anyway for most deployments. Okay, so we're nearly done. We've got all, and you can see there's a significant amount of reports that have come up. We'll go ahead and click Finish, and then we're done. We can run that deploy monitoring reports over and over and over, and in fact, these reports can live in multiple locations if that was what you wanted them to do. The reports themselves are just the engines to go pull data from the back end. They don't actually store any real data. So back to our control panel. We will now come to our users and back to home. And when we view the monitoring reports, it didn't refresh. We will force a refresh. Come on. All right, we'll relaunch it. When we pull this information, it will now show a link there. Now, you can either use this link to get to the monitoring reports. A lot of people actually do, and they like it that way. You could also just navigate to the SSRS database and select the reports and get into it that way. So as we log in, and typed it right, excellent. We will now see, oh, on SQL 01, there is a monitoring reports are physically deployed. By clicking the hyperlink, it will launch Internet Explorer and bring up ourselves directly to this page. Now, again, we could have also chosen, oh, and again, there's no data and nothing's impersonating correctly. That's okay. Let's see if we can get to SSRS itself. Instead of being the report server, which is the text version, I'm going to say go to the reports or the graphical interface of SSRS. And let's see if this pulls up. And as it slowly loads, we will show that there is SSRS. The reports have been deployed. Things just aren't working like we want them to. And again, it depends, the rights of SSRS and how it's been configured and deployed, a lot of that is documented, but you may be working with your SQL administrator to get this stuff up and into the environment. So we're looking at, we have the SQL Server reports here. If we go to detailed views, we can actually go into the reports and modify things like who and what and where the content physically is. And you'll notice all these various reports that have been pulled down, as well as some engines that'll show up, like the CDR database and the QoE down below. And so if we go to these databases, we can see, and this is where the permissions that we set when we logged in were passed to the server. We can also choose to just impersonate and use Windows Integrated Security. If we do that, we'll try to get around our stuff that hasn't replicated yet. And we'll go back to our content, and we'll do the same thing to the CD database. Again, not necessarily something you're going to want to do without testing and figuring out what connections and whose rights can get to SQL. So if you don't have rights into SQL initially, then impersonating credentials aren't going to do you any good. So now I'll get back to this report, and we'll try to refresh it. And it'll now be passing my personal credentials on to the SQL Server to see if we can go ahead and pull data. If I don't have rights to do that there, instead of impersonating, this will fail too. Back to the very top, if I was in this view and I wanted to go to the home page of where this is going to, and you can see it is now loading, I could have done that just as well. Let's go back to tile view. So by our default view, if I came into this view, oops, and I selected the home page, you'll notice here's the reports that I went to directly from the Lync control panel. And here's the reports I went to by going through SQL Server reporting services and navigating there. Exact same place. So it's really up to you how you want to get there. You could just save a shortcut and go there, or you could navigate through the control panel. Now you'll notice there's a bunch of reports that exist here. The dashboard is the one we were talking about, which is the quick view on what's going on in your world. As a quick tip, when you go into these various reports, there's a lot of times you can't go back or you can't change data. So to control click on any of these links will open up a new tab that allows you to stay on the main page you were at and just close this report down once you're done. And again, we have no data, so no devices have ever connected to our report list, as expected. If we go to our dashboard, nobody's ever logged in. Everything's unique. Everything's perfect as of today. Again, as expected, this is your weekly trend. We also have a monthly trend view. Won't be any better to be in the month because we didn't have anything in the week.
We've still got no data.
We still have no data. No data is no data. But the point is that all of the reports do exist, and the deployment of the reports was fairly simple to do. Some of your newer, bigger reports that are nice are your conference diagnostics and the join time reports. You'll also notice a lot of the reports as you're in them. If there was real data, there'd be obviously more information you could show, but hovering gives you a lot of information. So even hovering in the reports themselves to say, what is this conference join time report? And it shows the report of the overall view of the conference join time. Oh, that's nice. The diagnostic report shows the overall trend of failed conferences and things that aren't working correctly and the modalities that aren't working correctly. If we want to see which server is performing well or not performing well, that would be our server performance report. And then your CDR. This activity report is probably where 90% of my diagnostics start at, where I need to just say, okay, Bob just complained that he couldn't get in. So if I go to Bob at on-prem 123, I don't even know what our domain is, .biz, let's say that's what it was, and I went to go view his report. He's not going to have any data, even if that was correct, but I would show all of the activities he would have that we were monitoring, which would include his instant messaging communications, because that's CDR. We're going to pull information regarding his calls, his conferences, and getting deeper to those reports will show failures. You're also going to have green lights, red lights, yellow lights to say what the system considers to be a good call, a mediocre call, or a failed call.
So,
but that's by what it considers to be that.
Not only that, but a good thing to remember about these reports is Lync is only keying off 4 key attributes to mark those calls as good or bad. It's not taking the full effect of that. An important report to run here, though, is the top failures report, because a top failures report really is a report that shows it's how many calls failed due to the top 10 causes in your environment over the past 24 hours.
Right. And if all of those are different problems, you probably don't have a trending problem.
Right.
If they're all because of
all
down gateway, well, there you go. Now you know there's a down gateway issue.
Right.
Right.
Even if your users haven't reported to you, the monitoring server will help you be a little more proactive in your monitoring.
That's right. Again, this dashboard view is just a snapshot view to see overall how many minutes are we using, what modalities are being used, is there anything from a failure rate that's starting to spike, and we could see a trend happening in that method. And it's very common that this report is something that can be viewed from a, I don't know, from a NOC or some sort of management perspective, because it gives you a view into the environment without giving you really any data. It's just a trend analysis of what's going on, a dashboard, if you would. If we had things that were in here, we could hyperlink on things and get into graphical views, and it would give you pie charts and breakdowns and all kinds of pretty stuff. Again, there's no data, so nothing to see. But, okay.
With that, I
think that's, yeah.
Yeah, there aren't any open questions in the chat that I can see, and I think we're going to take a break for a few minutes here and come back and get into the next session,
which is
troubleshooting.
Yeah. So with that, we appreciate it, and we'll see you in a few.
Thanks.